Welcome to Pen and Perspective, where the story always knows more than it's telling. Every word is intentional. Every silence holds a truth. Let's get into it. I didn't post it for shock value. That's the part people always get wrong. By the time I hit upload, I had already sat with the footage for 2 days, watched it without sound, watched it slowed down, watched it like someone who knows what it costs to be right in public. I don't move fast just because I can. I move when I'm sure. People know me because things I touch tend to travel. Not because I'm loud, not because I'm reckless, but because I don't speak until I can stand on it. I've been doing this long enough to know the difference between gossip and gravity. The trend story taught me that. When people said I was messy for laying out the timeline, until the receipts stacked up and the apologies started rolling out sideways. The church story taught me too. When I didn't offer commentary at first, just played the clip back in full and let folks hear what was actually said. It went everywhere anyway, because truth doesn't need embellishment. It just needs space. And the community story, the one that changed policy, that one reminded me why I don't flinch when people tell me to be careful. Careful usually means quiet. This time wasn't different in scale. It was different in structure. Because this story didn't point at one villain. It showed a system breathing. I knew the moment I posted it that names wouldn't be said. People who know how numbers move would recognize themselves. People who benefit from silence would feel exposed without ever being mentioned. What I didn't do was check the comments right away. I waited because there's a moment after something lands, right before the backlash, where the absence of noise tells you everything. Phones stop ringing. Group chats pause. Certain people don't post like they usually do. That's the silence I noticed, not because I wanted chaos, but because silence means people are calculating. And when people start calculating, they've already understood the threat. That instinct didn't come out of nowhere. I learned it early, back when truth still felt like something you could hold in your hands. I grew up in Inglewood, went to Inglewood High, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and rumors move faster than facts if you let them. I talked too much in class, always had a question, always wanted to know why something was happening the way it was, not just that it was happening. The first time a teacher told me I needed to learn when to be quiet, I joined the school newspaper instead. It wasn't glamorous. Old computers, broken chairs, a deadline board that stayed crooked no matter how many times we tried to straighten it. But I loved it. Loved the discipline of it. Loved that you couldn't just say something. You had to prove it. Quotes mattered. Context mattered. What you left out mattered just as much as what you printed. I wasn't into gossip even then. Never liked the idea of ruining somebody just to be interesting. I wanted the kind of truth that corrected things, the kind that put something back in its proper place. I watched how a poorly worded sentence could take on a life of its own, how one rumor printed without care could follow a kid for the rest of the year, how silence could be just as violent as lies. So I learned to slow down, to verify, to sit with discomfort, to let a story reveal itself instead of forcing it to perform. That habit never left me. It followed me into adulthood, into social media spaces where speed is rewarded and caution is mistaken for fear, where people think influence means immediacy and accountability is an afterthought. But I've seen what happens when information moves without intention. I've watched stories turn into weapons. I've watched people hide behind just asking questions. I've watched real harm get waved away as collateral damage. So, no, I don't post for shock value. I don't post to trend. I don't post because I'm bored or angry or trying to prove a point. I post when I know what I'm holding. That's why I let the footage sit. That's why I watched it without sound. That's why I watched it slowed down. I wasn't looking for outrage. I was looking for structure because systems don't fall apart loudly. They expose themselves in patterns. And this story was all pattern. It didn't accuse. It didn't editorialize. It didn't give anybody an easy villain to point at and say, there, that's the problem. It showed movement, relationships, incentives, silences. It showed how numbers travel when nobody's watching, how decisions get justified without ever being explained, how harm can look clean on paper. I knew names wouldn't be said. I knew people would ask why I didn't go further, why I didn't connect the dots out loud. But I've learned something over the years. When you tell people exactly what to think, they argue. When you show them the shape of the truth, they recognize themselves. And recognition is harder to outrun than accusation. That's why I didn't rush to the comments, didn't brace for impact, didn't start explaining myself. I waited because there's a very specific quiet that follows a story like this. Not confusion, not dismissal. Calculation. It's the quiet of people checking their own exposure, of conversations moving off public timelines, of calls that don't get returned right away. That silence doesn't mean nothing happened. It means something landed exactly where it was supposed to. And I've learned to trust that moment. Because once people start calculating, the story has already done its job. Update 1. The morning after the video went live, my phone was quiet in a way that felt intentional. Not empty, intentional. No frantic texts. No fake concern. No, are you okay? Messages from people who usually couldn't wait to be seen next to a trending name. The silence wasn't relief. It was calculation. Everybody was waiting to see who would blink first. I made coffee like I always do. Same mug, same spot on the counter, where the light hits just right around 8 something. I didn't rush. I never rush after something goes viral. I've learned that urgency belongs to people who don't understand what they've just set in motion. I checked my notifications once, not to reread anything, just to see the shape of the response. The numbers were already doing what numbers do. Views climbing, shares stacking, comments splitting into camps. Some people loud and righteous, some people defensive in ways that told on themselves, some people quiet because they recognized a pattern they'd seen before. What I paid attention to was who hadn't said anything. Institutions don't react the way people do. They don't shout. They don't argue. They don't trend. They convene. They email. They schedule meetings at inconvenient times and call it protocol. That's how you know you've landed somewhere real. This wasn't the first time something I posted changed the temperature of a room I wasn't in. Earlier this year, I broke a story that people still reference without saying my name. The Trinae story didn't land in my lap as gossip. It landed as math that didn't add up. I remember exactly where I was when I first clocked it. Sitting in my car outside a grocery store in Inglewood, engine still running, phone balanced on the steering wheel because I told myself I was only going to scroll for a minute. Somebody had stitched a video, half laughing, half furious, talking about how her best friend's husband had been acting strange, too defensive, too polished, too many explanations for questions nobody asked yet. The comments were already messy. Accusations, jokes, people picking sides without knowing what they were siding with. That's usually where I log off, but something about the way the timeline kept correcting itself caught my attention. Someone mentioned a business filing. Someone else mentioned a church connection. Another comment quietly dropped a date that didn't match the public story everyone was running with. That's when I opened my notes app. I didn't post for 2 days. I pulled public records, marriage licenses, LLC registrations, old tagged photos people forget are still visible. I cross-checked timelines the way you do when you're not interested in who looks bad, just who's lying. By the time I posted, the video wasn't dramatic. It was boring. Screenshots, dates, side by side timelines. A calm voice explaining how two things people swore were unrelated were actually deeply connected. No accusations, no insults, just receipts laid out clean enough that anyone could follow them. That's what changed everything. People weren't reacting to scandal, they were reacting to clarity. By the end of that week, allegedly disappeared from the conversation because there was nothing left to allege. Brands quietly cut ties. A church issued a statement that never said Trene's name, but somehow answered every question about her. Commenters who had been loud on day one went quiet by day three. What stuck with people wasn't that I broke the story. It was that I didn't editorialize it. I didn't tell anyone how to feel. I just showed them what was already true and let them sit with it. What people didn't see was what happened after the noise died down. Because the story didn't end online. 2 weeks later, a quiet update hit the county docket. No press release, no alert, just a filing time stamped early in the morning, the kind you only notice if you're looking for it. Fraud, misrepresentation, conspiracy to conceal assets. Not dramatic charges, serious ones. The husband wasn't just cheating. He'd been moving money through shell companies tied to the same LLC someone casually mentioned in a comment thread. The friend wasn't just complicit. She'd signed documents. Church funds had been rerouted. Community donations misclassified. The math that didn't add up turned out to be intentional. Once the records were pulled, it unraveled fast. Witnesses came forward quietly. Bank statements filled in gaps I hadn't even published. Emails I never had access to showed up in discovery. By the time arrests were made, my name wasn't mentioned in the articles that followed, but my screenshots were, my timelines, my side-by-sides, quoted without attribution, embedded like public knowledge. That's usually how it goes. I didn't need credit. I needed accuracy, and accuracy has weight. That case moved from social media to courtrooms without ever looping back for commentary. No interviews, no victory laps, just outcomes. The kind that leave people recalibrating how casually they dismiss what happens online. That's when I noticed the shift. Lawyers started watching my page. Not liking, watching. Reporters stopped asking me what I thought and started asking me what I had. And law enforcement, the kind that operates quietly, started treating my posts like early indicators instead of noise. I didn't hear Detective Strauss's name then, but I know now that's when he clocked mine. Because once a story survives discovery, once it stands up in court without you ever stepping into a witness box, you stop being a creator. You become a variable, and variables get tracked. I didn't feel proud about that. I felt careful, because when stories move from consequence to pattern, the attention that follows doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just watches. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes it remembers your name long before you ever hear theirs. After that, my name started moving differently. People sent tips, not rumors, screenshots with context, documents instead of voice notes. I became the place people went when they wanted something handled carefully, not loudly. That's the part folks don't talk about when they talk about virality. Once people trust you, the stories find you. People trust me, not because I'm loud, but because I was clever, because I didn't disappear after the first hit. I didn't post for mess. I posted for the record. The think pieces had started last night, but were growing by the hour. People arguing about intent instead of content. That's always the tell. When nobody can refute the facts, they start speculating about the person who presented them. I'd been here before, too. Harassment doesn't announce itself. It shows up as curiosity at first. A profile view that lingers too long. A DM asking questions that feel slightly off. a request for clarification that isn't really about clarity. At first, I treat it like noise. People are curious when you tell the truth well. They want to know how you got something, who you talked to, whether you really know what you're saying, or if you just got lucky this time. But then the questions start repeating. Different accounts, same phrasing. Different platforms, same timing. Someone asking about a detail I didn't post publicly. Someone else referencing a draft I never shared. A comment deleted too fast for anyone else to notice, but not fast enough for me to miss. That's usually when I stop responding. Not because I'm afraid, because I've learned the difference between engagement and mapping. Harassment escalates quietly. An email routed through a media inquiry address that doesn't exist anywhere online. A voicemail with no message left, just breathing before the line clicks off. A DM that starts polite and ends with, "You should be careful how you frame things." Not a threat, not exactly. A suggestion? I've had people pull my old addresses. I've had strangers mention my high school like it's trivia. I've had someone describe my car correctly in a comment thread that had nothing to do with transportation. That's when I know it's crossed from curiosity into monitoring. I don't panic. I document screenshots, timestamps, patterns. I move my routine slightly. I stop posting in real time. I let people think they're closer than they are because the people who harass like this aren't impulsive. They're testing boundaries, seeing what makes you flinch, measuring how much pressure it takes before you start explaining yourself. And I don't explain. What most of them don't realize is that I've been here before, not just once, not just online. Truth telling makes enemies in places that don't look like villains at first. Sometimes it looks like law enforcement asking casual questions. Sometimes it looks like concerned citizens who know a little too much about your day. I've learned that the loud threats aren't the dangerous ones. It's the quiet ones who think they're invisible. And by the time they realize I see them too, I've already decided what I'm willing to risk and what I'm not willing to give up. You don't get into this line of work thinking people will thank you for it. By noon, my phone buzzed for the first time with something that mattered. Not a message. A calendar notification I hadn't put there myself. That's when I knew. This story wasn't done moving yet. People think virality is the explosion. It's not. That's just the spark. The real damage, the real change, happens in the quiet hours after, when the wrong people realize their names don't need to be said out loud for everyone to understand who's being discussed. I finished my coffee, let it go cold. Whatever was coming next wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be precise. And it wasn't going to stop with me posting a video. That was never how this works. That realization is where we'll stop this part. In part 2, we're getting into what happens after the system starts watching back. You've been listening to Pen and Perspective. If it sat in your spirit, let it linger. If it stirred something in you, don't ignore it.